Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state issues, sometimes federal issues, and how they just might affect your life. I'm Bernie Schoenburg from the State Journal-Register. We are still remote, but we feel so connected through the screen. It's great. With me today, Rebecca Anzel is back. She is a State House reporter for Capitol News, Illinois. Welcome back, Rebecca.
Thank you.
And Dave Dahl is here. He is a man about town for WTAX radio in Springfield and other stations he feeds great news to. Thank you, Dave.
Bernie, thanks.
Okay, here we go. Rebecca, we'll start with something that is both symbolic, but also will have some real, bring on some real changes around the Capitol grounds. The architect of the Capitol had a meeting of the advisory board this week, and there will be some changes made in what statues we see around the State House.
Yeah, so the statues of Stephen Douglas, who your viewers might recall debated Lincoln a whole lot. He was a senator. He was an Illinois Supreme Court justice. His statue outside the State House on 2nd Street will be taken down, and the one of Pierre Menard is also going to be taken down. Both those men were slave owners. Speaker Madigan had requested back on July 9th that those two statues be removed. The board voted to do so. They also voted to change a rule that's barring the statue of MLK, who is right now featured on Freedom Corner, as it's known, in front of the Illinois State Library, to bring him onto the state grounds. And then they want to do an analysis of historical structures that are on the grounds. I think it's important to note, and two of the advisory board members brought this up too, that there's also a statue of Douglas on the inside of the Capitol, on the 2nd floor in the rotunda, that for now will be there still. And the huge portrait of Stephen Douglas that's in the House chamber, Speaker Madigan had that covered. He said again in that statement in July that he's going to be trying to replace that with one of former President Barack Obama. But there's still Douglas things around. It's just the statue outside the State House that's going to be removed.
Right. Well, interestingly, the Martin Luther King statue is just across the street, across 2nd Street in Springfield from where the Abraham Lincoln statue is, and then the outdoor Stephen Douglas statue is behind that. But that statue of Martin Luther King Jr. Created a stir in Springfield some years ago because it was located in the Capitol complex in a place that was kind of near the state archives and not easily visible by anybody. Then there was a movement, and I think George Ryan got it done when he was Secretary of State, if I recall, who got it moved to the corner where the state library is, which is across from the Capitol. But as you say, Rebecca, there's this ongoing rule that you have to have a connection to Illinois to be on the State House grounds itself. And that's the rule that they might want to change now to move that statue across. There was also a little sniping about if that's a good statue and a good representation of Martin Luther King. I don't know.
There's no evidence that he had his sport coat flung over his shoulder like that.
Right, yeah, so, we'll see if that changes, but clearly, the death of George Floyd, the Black Lives Matter and other social justice movements that have come together in recent months have yielded these changes. It's a kind of an interesting that the person who brought this change on with kind of a letter and a demand to the architect of the Capitol to get this done was House Speaker Michael Madigan, who can be controversial in other ways, but found this issue and it is taking root and got agreement from this bipartisan panel that advises the architect of the Capitol. So,
and Bernie,
does more than advise, by the way. Their word is that's final stop on that. My understanding. Okay. They're more than advisory.
Excuse me for saying that. Yeah, and Rebecca?
So yeah, I was just going to point out, everybody forgets that the Supreme Court is also here in Springfield because Stephen Douglas was a justice. His portrait is also across the street in the Supreme Court building. And the court released a statement a couple weeks ago, and they basically said, yes, Stephen Douglas and others that are featured on the walls in the Supreme Court were slave owners and they were racists, but like taking down their portrait doesn't change the fact. So it sounds like they're not going to be touching that one either. Gotcha.
Now, Douglas, I think, and I read something, his first wife's father gave her and their children ownership of their plantation in Mississippi, and then he was managing the slaves, so he was able to kind of play it both ways back at the time, but clearly he benefited strongly from the culture at the time that he was in favor of at least allowing states that entered the Union to vote on keeping slavery, and that's what Lincoln opposed him on. So on we go. Dave, let's talk about COVID-19, which is the issue that all of us have been dealing with for 5 months, much more so than we wanted, and we hope everybody stays healthy. But in the Metro East area, there have been some changes. There have been enough new cases that the governor made some changes in. I guess there's 11 regions now in the state, and Region 4 had to take some extra measures, according to the governor.
Yeah, the Metro East. And, you know, it's easy to blame people going to St. Louis and bringing it back, but Missouri's rules are far more open than Illinois'. And, you know, it would appear that the area closest to St. Louis, you know, has a runoff effect from that, a ripple effect, if you will. It wasn't the Metro East, something like 8% positivity or some relatively high number. They're cracking down there with, you know, the bars and restaurants, 25% or 25 people or something like that. And you can't sit on a bar stool. And
right, so it kind of cuts it back to half of what the rest of the state has with 50 people or 50% of capacity, I think.
No party buses.
Yeah, so it's interesting that the governor is having to continue to fight this battle. We know that the state is running that $5 million ad campaign saying, you know, masks only work if you wear them. I think they got some good reviews from some national outfit saying this is a good way to explain it to people by comparing them to seat belts or you know, a life vest. If you don't wear it, it doesn't help, and you're just helping other people. But it's interesting. And there's another COVID development. The governor announced that there's a saliva test that apparently at the U of I has developed, and the Federal Food and Drug Administration has, I believe, allowed emergency authorization for its use. So that could cut costs and cut time for testing in places like university campuses and other places. So I guess we are continuing to evolve, even as there are some out there who say, I don't want to wear a mask.
I think Wednesday's coronavirus briefing was the closest thing to a celebration that we've had since the saga started.
Okay, and that was the one where he announced that this rapid test is...
He had the president of the university system, President Killeen, with him.
Mm-hmm.
You don't get any higher than that.
Well, there you go. Okay. Rebecca, people, I'll switch to another issue, but people are not necessarily celebrating what were some ongoing cutbacks nationwide in US Postal Service operations. We know that there have been some alarms sounded about those blue mailboxes being taken away from some places. I haven't seen that happen in Springfield, but various places across the country, some sorting machines. And tell us about that, because it's an ongoing political issue with the president continuing to say he doesn't believe that mail-in ballots are can be used without a lot of fraud. He especially when in states not like Illinois where ballots are sent to every voter. So what's going on with that?
So actually, the situation has gotten so serious that a whole bunch of states are suing the Postal Service over it. Illinois has joined a coalition of 13 other states to sue. They're basically arguing that by the United States Postmaster General sort of removing boxes, changing sorting machines, getting rid of overtime for postal workers, and a number of other things that he is sort of disenfranchising people. And so a lot of seniors still use the mail. Veterans get their benefits through the mail. Some people get their medications through the mail. And so they're arguing that that is a huge thing. It's not legal. Any post office changes that affect the entire nation have to go through a certain process, and the Postmaster General didn't do that, they say. As you mentioned, though, with this election, because of COVID, there's some belief that a ton of people are going to want to vote by mail. And so if the post office cuts services and reduces, you know, the services they offer, how quickly mail can get from place to place, there's this idea that voters will be disenfranchised, that democracy can't go forward, as the lawsuit says. So like I said, Illinois is in one coalition of states. Pennsylvania is heading up another lawsuit. There's talk that New York is going to have its own. The reason why there's so many is because Illinois had a vote by mail program. The Washington state is heading up that lawsuit with Illinois. they all had vote by mail systems already. Pennsylvania had to file its own lawsuit because they just instituted one. So it's slightly complicated, but yeah, that's the gist of what they're arguing.
Right, and as we recall, the Illinois legislature this year, in its, I think it was during the 4-day meeting where the House was actually meeting socially distanced at the convention center downtown Springfield. They passed special legislation to affect this year's election, determining that everybody since I believe the November 2018 election, everybody who voted or was registered or who voted in that election or elections beyond that or has registered to vote since will be sent applications, and should have been by now, applications for mail-in ballots. And there are some, deadlines very close to the election, just like of just a few days before the election, you can still get those applications into your county clerk or election authority, and then they're supposed to send you back the ballot. We've also, since then, I believe it's every state, and I know that Illinois State Board of Elections got a letter from a high legal official of the Postal Service saying, with the deadlines you set in your state, there may not be time for ballots to be sent to people and to get them on time and then to send them back to be counted on time. In Illinois, you have to get the ballot in the mail. It has to be postmarked by Election Day, which is November 3rd. If a ballot, and this has been the case in Illinois for years, if the ballot arrives within 2 weeks of the election, it will be counted. Now the president, in talking about mail-in voting in negative terms, because he seems to be wanting to say things will be rigged if people use mail-in ballots, even though he uses an absentee ballot, which of course you have to request, and it's not just a ballot sent to you unless you request it. He has said it's fraudulent, but he has said, they in Illinois, if you get it in by 2 weeks, it will be counted, but it may not get there on time. Illinois, again, has had this rule for a number of years that if it arrives within 2 weeks, it will be counted. Some states don't have that, and it has to arrive by Election Day. In Sangamon County, the Democratic Party has made a request of Circuit Clerk or County Clerk Don Gray to put 3 drop boxes, which would not be mailboxes, but you could just drop your ballots in them. The Democrats say you could have cameras on them 24 hours a day, and people could just drop their ballots there. And the Illinois legislation gave election authorities like county clerks the ability to decide to do a drop box or not. Don Gray initially said the chain of title of the ballot might be in question. I don't want to do that, but he is reconsidering because of the warning that Illinois officials got from the mail service and also what the Democrats have said. So we will see where that goes. It's a continuing thing as we tape this show. I don't think a decision has been made in Sangamon County, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see drop boxes or something like it. So there we go. Dave, we've had the Democratic National Convention going on this week, and Illinois Democrats have opened themselves up or have been doing a number of things while not at a convention site in Milwaukee as they expected. They've been having virtual press conferences every afternoon. They've been having virtual meetings for their delegates that we can watch online from 6:30 to 8 before the national convention every night. And they've been taking on some big issues like women's rights and social justice. And how's it going? Well,
You're right, and it's quite open. They had a thing Sunday night that was a virtual reception, and they allowed reporters questions. They've been awfully open, and you can imagine doing stories about this and having somebody call up or write in and say, hey, what about the Republicans, you biased person? And of course, the Republicans are next week. I've already contacted the Republican Party in Illinois to see what opportunity there will be. And you haven't heard. I mean, they're like, well, we'll get back to you, and they haven't. So it would appear that we're not going to have the kind of opportunity to look in, listen, and ask what those folks are doing as they renominate President Trump, as we are this week for the Democrats, as they nominate Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
Yeah, well, Joe Hackler is the spokesman for the state GOP, and he did put out a statement that basically said that 3 people, State Chairman Tim Schneider, National Committeeman Richard Porter, National Committee Woman Demetria DeMonte are planning to travel to Charlotte, and they'll be casting some votes for Illinois for the renomination. But they also had a statement in his little release that I saw: no other media advised events organized by the Illinois GOP are taking place next week. So it is a significant difference. And what's interesting about this is that the Republicans have to deal with in Illinois, an Illinois that has been shifting to the Democratic side in national elections in recent years. And President Trump is certainly not popular in suburban areas, and in Chicago, maintains significant popularity, I think, in central and southern Illinois. But the Democrats have a bit of a problem on their hands because House Speaker Michael Madigan, not charged with any crime, but has been named in the Commonwealth Edison case, where that utility has agreed to pay $200 million, saying they tried to bribe their way into certain good legislation by doing things good for Speaker Madigan's associates.
If they were to have a thing every day, the Republicans, they could hammer on that every day.
They could.
They want a megaphone for that. I guess that's advice that I ought to be charging them for.
Yeah, what's interesting is that even as the Democrats have met, they've had reporter questions, and some of the stories I've seen, well, what do you think? Marie Newman, who is defeated Congressman Lipinski in the primary and is running for Congress. What do you think of Madigan? Should he stay or should he go? And her answer was, well, I don't want to get distracted by that. Look at Trump, and we're trying to accomplish good Democratic goals. So the Democrats have opened themselves up, and yet they're being transparent, and the Republicans, it sounds like maybe not next week. So we'll
Could be right. That it's a different kind of convention. I wonder if anybody out there is thinking, boy, we should have thought of Zoom a long time ago. You don't have to pack bags or anything like that and get on a plane. It's a lot more easier, and now it's a lot easier and fun this way. Who knows?
In all the years I've been covering this stuff, delegates have had to pay their way to conventions, and they jack up the prices of the rooms, and everything costs so much, and it's really hard to get around those cities because of so much security. So yeah, people are like on their couch and doing their civic duty, but they're also missing that shoulder to shoulder thing. Rebecca, one of the other big upheavals in our lives, and again, it's since George Floyd's death, with the knee on his neck involving a police officer, has been the movement for social justice. We've had a couple of odd and interesting, kind of difficult examples in Illinois. There's a former state representative, Art Turner. This is Art Turner, the older one, because his son was also a state rep who recently left office. But Art Turner Sr. was arrested in Chicago for not having a front license plate. And then he was mistaken for someone much younger than him named Art Turner, who was wanted for missing a court appearance on something. And he had handcuffs put on, and they hurt his wrists, and it was an hours-long problem. And then there's a state representative, Curtis Tarver II, who also just got arrested for a malfunctioning headlight, and he was wrongly accused of not having an up-to-date firearm owner ID card or something for his concealed carry license. Rebecca, these are kind of hard. We know these people, and they seem to be examples that some people are getting treated badly by law enforcement.
Yeah, and these are not new problems. This has been happening for, goodness knows how long now. I have spoken with Representative Tarver before this incident, and I mean, we at Capitol News had done a project right after George Floyd's death, just to see what our Black lawmakers were thinking and feeling. And, we asked everybody, do you have a related experience? And Representative Tarver had laughed, and he's like, I'm a Black man who lives in Chicago. Of course I have. I spoke with Senator Sims too, and Senator Sims, for anybody that has seen him, I mean, he is a friendly guy, but he is very intelligent, and you can feel that off of him.
Yeah, this is LG Sims.
Yes, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
He had told me the story that he went, he lives in Chicago, his daughter lives in Chicago. It was an elementary school field trip, and he went up the block to get some snacks. And immediately, it was cold, it was winter. Chicago's very cold in the winter, as we all know. He had his hands in his pockets. Cops saw him, told him to take his hands out of his pockets. And he was like, why? It's cold. I'm about to go into this store to get some snacks for these kids for this field trip. Long story short, he was, kind of roughed around a bit by the cops, while his daughter and her classmates sort of watched from down the block until they realized that his license plate was one of a lawmaker. And then they were like, hey, wait a second, who are you? And backed off. The same thing happened with Representative Tarver. Once they realized that he was an attorney and a state rep, the cops backed off. it'll be interesting to see when the lawmakers return. The Legislative Black Caucus has said that they want to pass and propose this omnibus of changes to our statutes to make life more equitable for everybody. And so it'll be interesting to see whether that is ready to be proposed in November and December when the General Assembly is back for veto session, or whether they'll wait till they're back in January for their full session.
Interesting. Well, on this subject, I could also mention that Springfield has a interesting history in race relations. There was a 1908 race riot. It was pretty terrible stuff. Some African-American people were killed in it. And there is an excavation site where they were doing some railroad work and found some foundations of houses that were burned down apparently during that riot. And the Interior Secretary of the United States, David Bernhardt, was in Springfield just late in the week to give a federal designation to that site. So that's something that the local officials and members of Congress have been working for a while. Dave, I'll go to you now. Big Jim Thompson of Illinois passed away in the last week. He was 84 years old. He was the longest serving governor from Illinois. Apparently he was a shy campaigner at the beginning, but became one of the great campaigners. And I'm sure you talked to some people with very interesting remembrances of the long tenure of JRT.
Larger than life he was, and a lot of the remembrances were that he had such a legal career after leaving office. I think it's noteworthy as he was in office from the ages of 40 to 54. So he had an awful lot of life after that, after leaving the governorship. And I recall talking to him, it was either sometime before Bruce Rauner was sworn into office. I'm not sure exactly how long before that, but I said, here you've got someone who's made his whole life in business, none of it in politics. Is he going to be able to go in there and run the levers of power or even find him? And Governor Thompson said, oh, you find him pretty quickly. So that might have been his last appearance in Springfield. It was some Supreme Court event, as I recall.
Yeah. Rebecca, were you involved in any of the coverage in the past, or you came to our state after that?
I came here 3 years ago, so I totally missed him.
Well, let me just say, I started covering the legislature for the paper in Bloomington on and off starting in the summer of '77. He was elected in '76, and the first term was a new term, so he was fresh in office. I think his daughter Samantha had just been born, and he was very popular. His wife Jane was a lawyer too, who I ultimately had to, I think, give up her practice for a while because of her husband's job, and I think went into some other line of work. She was a very productive person herself, but he was larger than life. He only had a 2-year term. The Democrats basically had no chance and it was a 2-year term to start with, because that's when Illinois went off the presidential schedule, so people could actually pay attention. The idea was to governor races without being overshadowed by a presidential race. So he was elected in '76, and then in '78, a guy named Michael Bacalus, who had been the elected state leader of education at the time, ran for governor and got pretty much crushed. His running mate at the time was a Springfield lawyer and political guy named Dick Durbin, who ran for lieutenant governor that year. Didn't work out so well, but Durbin will be one of the first to tell you that sometimes it helps to lose a race or two because it teaches you how to win the next ones, and Durbin is up for re-election this year. One of my memories of Jim Thompson, in 1981, George Ryan was Speaker of the House. Yes, there was another speaker before Mike Madigan, and actually right to work legislation had made its way, I believe, through a committee and was going to be heard on the floor of the House. And labor was very strong in Illinois, stronger in numbers perhaps than now, I'm not sure of that, but there were thousands of people that came to a rally against right to work and pro-labor rally where people were, there were actually people in the trees on the State House grounds. It was the fullest I have ever seen the State House by the Douglas and Lincoln statues. And Jim Thompson was a Republican governor, and he came out and people booed him. Then he started calling out everybody's different labor groups, saying hello to all of them. Basically said, right to work legislation will never pass under my administration. I'm friends with Bob Gibson, the head of the state AFL-CIO, and By the end of it, people were cheering for him. He invited everybody over to the multiple keg beer fest at the mansion. Come over to the mansion for a beer. People walked a few blocks, and that was like my favorite Jim Thompson story because it just showed what he was. With that, with a good memory of Big Jim, he also liked patronage and led to the Route 10 decision. But there's good and bad in anybody that serves 14 years. Rebecca Anzel and Dave Dahl, thanks for your conversation. I'm Bernie Schoenburg. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View.